Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Very Cold Lasagna podcast. I'm your host, DylanLasagna, and this is episode number 212 of this icy yet spicy sports podcast for all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And in this episode, we're going to turn back the clock, go back into the old icebox once again for another retro review. How far are we going back this time around? Well, we're going to go back 20 years into the past to a familiar year that we have come accustomed to this year for something that's been fresh on our minds in this past month, well, in the last week, which was SummerSlam, to talk about the 2004 edition of, well, this very show, SummerSlam. The 2004 edition, the 17th annual SummerSlam. And, well, see how it stacks up in the year of 2024. So, yeah, SummerSlam this year is still fresh on my mind. It's only been a week, but usually this time of month, I like to see how things are with these older SummerSlams, and kind of go back on it because, well, I didn't see much of it or any of it these past shows when I was younger, when I wasn't much of a wrestling fan back then. But I want to see it from the field casual point of view, and especially for those of you that have never watched any of these SummerSlams or any of these pay-per-views. That's why I do the retro reviews on my podcast. So we're gonna do it here once again, and I'm interested to see how this pay-per-view unfolds as we talk about it in this episode. But before we get into this retrospective of SummerSlam 2004 on this episode, make sure to follow the show on social media, on Twitter and Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna. If you're listening to this on audio, which by the way you should, make sure you follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, listen to it on there, wherever Very Cold Lasagna is available. Rate and review the show, however you want to rate it. Leave a review, and then if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to smash the subscribe button. Leave a comment down below with your takes on each and every episode, each and every video that I post exclusively on there, and yeah, give me your takes on whatever I post on there. And for this one, it's the 2004 edition of SummerSlam. The YouTube has been doing pretty well recently, so let's continue to grow this icy yet spicy fridge that continues to do well. And then, of course, smash the like button as well. And share this with your friends, share this with your neighbors, share this with a stranger, share this with your colleagues, whether it's at work or at school. Share the good, the bad, the ugly when it comes to Very Cold Lasagna. So, that being said, let's talk about this pay-per-view, shall we? The 2004 edition of SummerSlam. The 2004 edition of SummerSlam, going into it, honestly, when I've looked back at these pay-per-views of this particular year in 2004, not exactly too hot. Now, granted, 2024, aside from, the Bloodline, the whole Judgment Day drama with Rhea Ripley, Liv Morgan, Dominic Mysterio, and then CM Punk versus Drew McIntyre. The rest of the WWE, a lot to be desired, and not particularly doing well. Those three stories have been carrying the WWE like right now. But other than that, not really too much. With 2004, there was honestly, there wasn't really a whole lot either, because when I reviewed these past shows, especially post WrestleMania with Backlash, Bad Blood, and then, on the side, I looked at Judgment Day and the Great American Bash a little bit. Yeah, there wasn't really that many particularly interesting stuff when it comes to it. I mean, sure, you had JBL as WWE champion, which was not exactly interesting, but he was building upon his new character, which I thought was actually pretty interesting. And then, other than JBL being the WWE champion, and on the Raw side, not exactly too much, because Evolution was pretty much dominating that brand still. During that time, Triple H wasn't even World Heavyweight Champion. Triple H's reign of terror, as people like to say it, and Chris Benoit as the World Heavyweight Champion, kind of in the same situation that Cody Rhodes is in. Not a lot of challengers, and not particularly interesting champion, and so there's two sides of the coin when it comes to it. Whereas as a good as a wrestler Chris Benoit was, not exactly the most interesting personality. And again, not a lot of challengers at bay for Benoit. So other than that, I mean, there wasn't a lot of also, yeah, main caliber talent besides Evolution and then Benoit. There's also other couple of interesting storylines aside from that, but yeah, nothing else to note. Going into this second biggest show of the year, which was SummerSlam. So I ramble on about like what was going on during that time and how there's nothing particularly interesting because, well, another thing to note, if you missed my other retro reviews from 2004, a lot of main event players like Brock Lesnar, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Goldberg, they've either left or they were out injured. But for those, in the particular case of those four, they were gone. But yeah, a lot of main event caliber talent were either gone or injured. And well, there wasn't anyone there to step up at the moment, and they weren't really building anyone at that time. So going into the show, the 2004 edition of SummerSlam, it took place on August 15th, 2004, in the Air Canada Centre, which is now known as the Scotiabank Arena in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Obviously, nowadays, it's a much familiar place for the wrestling fans to have their shows. So, in the home of the Toronto Raptors, this would be the first SummerSlam at the time, since 1992, that this SummerSlam would take place outside the United States. That until it happened again in 2019. So, this 17th annual SummerSlam, as customary during the time, which had the original brand split. So, in case you don't know what the original brand split was, it was the whole WWE roster divided into two and had its own separate shows, like its whole different storylines. Like Raw had its own separate storylines. Like I said, with Evolution, Benoit, and then one particular storyline I'm going to get into when I talk about that match. And then on SmackDown, you had JBL, The Undertaker, and all other stars doing their own thing. So that was basically what the brand split was. So they had their own separate pay-per-views too, their own separate titles. But with this being a Big Four pay-per-view, this is basically an interpromotional show, featured both brands. So this was an exception where, both brands could basically do whatever they want. They could interact with each other. They can have interpromotional matches. So that kind of thing. So now that I talked about a little bit about the show itself, let's get into the match card because, well, it's a bit of a doozy. It's a bit of a doozy, and it's either for good or for bad. So we started off the show with Sunday Night Heat, the pre-show where, as you're watching it on VH1 or it's TNN, whichever channel it was at the time, because honestly, when I do these retro reviews, I can never remember which channel it was. But anyway, whichever channel it was on network or cable TV, you were trying to rush through that 1 hour where I need to get some money to buy the pay-per-view. I'm scrambling. I need some credit cards. I need to ask my parents if I was a little kid. I need that $50, pal. So while you were scrambling to get some money to buy the pay-per-view that's coming up in an hour, you had a Sunday Night Heat pre-show match that featured Rob Van Dam and Rana Dupree. So this was a fine tune-up match between the two, and it did its job to get the Toronto crowd fired up for the show, and that Toronto crowd became the topic of discussion all night long. We're going to talk about them a good amount during this retro review, but it did its job for this match. Getting ready for the show, RVD picked up the win with a big 5-star frog splash, and yeah, that pretty much warmed them up for the night. And like I said, we'll be talking a good amount about that Toronto crowd during this retro review. So the main show kicked off with a 6-man tag team match over on SmackDown, which featured Rey Mysterio, Billy Kidman, Paul London going up against the Dudley Boys. Not a lot of setup with this matchup right here, but basically the whole thing that you want to know here is that, as told via a video package before the match started, Spike Dudley basically wanted to be the boss of Bubba Ray and Devon Dudley. During this time, the Dudleys were heel all of a sudden. Don't know why, but that's what their situation was. So basically, the Dudleys were heel. Spike Dudley, who was the smaller of the three, and he wanted to be the man. So a couple weeks ago, during Dudley's cruiserweight title match, he put Rey Mysterio through a table. So to even the score, the tag team champions at the time, Paul London and Billy Kidman, came to the aid of Rey Mysterio on the go-home show before SummerSlam. So during this match, it was all right for what it was, but not really much to write home about. I mean, just like with the previous match, it did what it did to get the crowd ready for the rest of the show. So Rey Mysterio hit the 619 on Spike Dudley, and Billy Kidman was about to close it out with the shooting star press, and he did, but then Devon Dudley dragged him out of the ring and single-handedly took out the good guys. Like, he was outside the ring, beating up and taking out Rey Mysterio, Paul London, and then Billy Kidman, and he brought back Billy Kidman, but he fought out of it. But unfortunately, he couldn't escape the 3D from the Dudleys. And Spike Dudley, because I think he was the legal man in, so he wanted to take all the credit. So he pinned Kidman for the 1, 2, 3. Pretty standard match. Honestly, it didn't belong on a pay-per-view, if you ask me, because it was just, well, it was a standard match that, should have been on SmackDown, that you could have seen on SmackDown. But again, it did its job to fire everyone up, and it got all 6 guys on a pay-per-view, I guess. So the second match that I refer to very implicitly is a very interesting one. That was Kane versus Matt Hardy in a till death do us part match. This was one of the more interesting and crazier stories in 2004 on the Raw side, because I feel like I don't know if it gets talked about enough, or maybe it just doesn't get talked about enough because maybe it's just a little too controversial there, pal. But anyway, this was a wild storyline that began right after WrestleMania. Kane had just lost to The Undertaker at the event. So Kane, he fell in love. He fell in big red love with Lita. Lita being Matt Hardy's girlfriend and all that. But he rejected by Lita. And so Lita's boyfriend, both on screen and off screen at the time, Matt Hardy would attack Kane. So that sets up a feud. And then 2 months later, as Matt was going to propose to Lita, Kane revealed that, well, she slept with him in order to protect Matt Hardy, because, Kane's the big red machine and all that. So that led to her being pregnant with Kane's child. So yeah, things took a really interesting turn with that story when, it revealed that Kane got Lita pregnant. I hope that this doesn't lead to that kind of turn with, this ongoing storyline with, what we have now with this love triangle. I'm not going to try to go there, pal. But anyway, Matt Hardy beat Kane in a no disqualification match at Vengeance a month later in the July event. But things were far from done from there, as they decided to settle the score once and for all, decide, who gets Lita once and for all in this pay-per-view right here in a till death do us part match. So what exactly does that entail? Well, the winner would get the right to marry Lita. And it was revealed in the build-up to this match that Kane, well, through some kind of test, that he was indeed the father of Lita's child. So, yeah. I mean, if you go watch this on find a story of type of video, yeah, it gets even crazier than what I just described. Like the video, like the weekly segments, the video packages, way better than I described it, because it's just even like crazier to think about. Again, I hope they don't do this kind of turn with the current couple storyline that we got right now. I'm just saying, don't give Noseman any ideas now. But anyway, this match kind of reminds me of like a football game where you're getting so much offense in, and then one sudden move, suddenly changes the favor of the opponent. In this case, Matt Hardy was so desperate to keep Lita away from Kane because he was in major control of this match. Like, he was laying out all the offense in, despite, him being at a size disadvantage. But he was laying so much offense in. Like, I don't remember like at any point until, the very end, Kane was in full control. Because Matt Hardy version 1, by the way, I'm not sure why he was in version 1. They were referring to him as his version 1 character when during this whole feud he wasn't, clearly. But anyway, he pretty much hit everything he could, whether it was a middle rope side effect or hitting the twist of fate on the outside so he could take a count out victory. But yeah, he pretty much hit everything that he could. But Kane managed to overcome all that, and he overpowered Matt Hardy. And well, Matt made that one fatal mistake of trying to superplex him off the top rope because, well, Kane gave him that super choke slam off the top rope. And 1, 2, 3, a 3 count later, the girl was finally his. Kane took everything away that Matt Hardy loved, whether Lita liked it or not. And, well, Kane was finally his. Lita was finally his. That's how I say it. So, yeah, Kane finally got the girl that he desperately wanted 4 months later, whether Lita liked it or not. And, yeah, Lita would be forced to marry Kane sooner rather than later. And for this match itself, I was a little surprised that this was just your standard one-on-one match, with the stipulation and all that. But, yeah, I was surprised they didn't do, like, another no disqualification match, like another, like, unsanctioned type of stipulation. Because, it was kind of weird that there's, like, actual rules when 1 month prior they did this no DQ type of stipulation. Should have been the other way around. I don't know. But I guess Matt Hardy's desperation, him having the majority of the offense, it kind of nullified that of sorts. So overall, I mean, I thought this match was okay. I thought it was all right for what it was. So it kind of told the story. It did tell a story, at least, of Matt Hardy being desperate, but in the end, Kane wanted it more. It didn't really take much for him to get more. So of course, afterwards, Kane went on to marry Lita. And well, they had that marriage, and Matt Hardy couldn't do anything to stop it. And Matt Hardy was actually out with injury for a good year later on. So it was like a serious leg injury, if I remember correctly. But nonetheless, nothing Matt Hardy could do anyway. So they went on to have an actual relationship after. I mean, storyline. I'm talking about storyline, okay? I'm still talking about in kayfabe. So talking kayfabe wise, Kane and Lita actually went on to have an actual storyline marriage, and this was despite being spiteful to him at first. Lita managed to warm up to him. Kane went on to have a feud with Gene Snitsky. Yeah, remember Gene Snitsky when Lita miscarried their child because Gene Snitsky forced Kane onto Lita, fell onto her, and that's what caused their unborn child. And then Gene Snitsky punted a baby, a fake baby. Yeah, that moment. Oh boy, that was a choice. But anyway, yeah, that relationship lasted until May of the next year in 2005, where that whole controversy happened with Edge and Lita, and well, they had to do a 180 on that onto TV. Well, Kane had to get dumped by Lita for Edge. So this match was all right. It was an interesting choice to not have an actual rule-less no disqualification stipulation, but hey, again, the story kind of made more than up for it. So then, before we get to the next match, there was a backstage interview with Randy Orton. He was interviewed by Todd Grisham, once again proclaiming that he would fulfill his destiny and leave SummerSlam as the youngest World Heavyweight Champion in history. More on that match in a bit. But it was interesting during this interview that John Cena and Randy Orton had their first ever encounter. But while it was kind of like whatever during that time, because John Cena was basically just, doing via a rap on what the fans thought of whether Randy Orton could actually win the title. But, my opinion, this was actually very significant towards later on because, well, these two would actually become two of the top key players in the WWE much later on down the line. So this interaction eventually ended up being important. So, something to think about. The next matchup had the United States champion Booker T taking on John Cena. This matchup was actually the first of a best of 5 series for the United States Championship. Why was that? Well, John Cena, who was the United States champion at the time, he was actually stripped of that title by the then acting general manager Kurt Angle during a pull-apart brawl where Cena accidentally attacked Kurt Angle in his wheelchair because Angle was acting injured. But anyway, Cena was stripped of the title, and then Booker T, whom Cena had been feuding with for weeks, he won the vacated title a week later in an 8-man elimination match, which also involved John Cena. But then next week, new general manager Teddy Long used his first act as general manager to book a best of 5 series of matches between Booker T and Cena for the title. And like I said, this was the first of those best of 5 series of matches. So this match itself, it was okay. Nothing too memorable. And, I guess it's starting a theme of the SummerSlam where things were really not that memorable. Things were not really that ebb and flowing. It was just meh. It was just very meh. Because when you get to the point in the match, the last point in the match, you felt like, okay, it's over. So Booker T, he was pretty much in control a large chunk of this match. But then when John Cena was rallying back for a hot minute, Booker T instantly stopped it with a flapjack. And then all of a sudden you have Booker T doing his famous spin-a-rooney as a kip up. But then that led to his downfall because just when he looked like he was going to go for a scissor kick finish, Cena just grabbed him out of nowhere with the FU to win match number 1. It was just like in a blink in the eye. It was already over. So, yeah, not really a lot to write home about with this one because, well, not really a whole lot happened in this one. It was like, it ended like in the blink of an eye, which is kind of a bummer because these two actually had some like decent, better matches after this one. So this series did end up going to 5, by the way. John Cena wound up winning back the United States title in a tiebreaker match at No Mercy. But yeah, this match ended up being the downfall of this pay-per-view, to be honest with you, because I don't know, man. It was just kind of like pretty bland. It was a pretty bland match. The next matchup was the other mid-card title, which involved the Intercontinental Champion Edge defending his title against Batista and Chris Jericho. Not a lot of setup with this one. All the commentary noted was that Edge and Chris Jericho had been yapping at each other for weeks, but they shared a common enemy in Batista, who also had his sights set on Edge's Intercontinental Championship. But I mean, despite the lackluster setup and not much thereof, I'd say this was I guess some standards, the best matchup of the night. And that's such low standards of what we have right now. But this was a very solid 3-way. Like a very solid 3-way match. I guess, having more than one person involved because it picked up the pace. Like they were all getting at each other at various points of one another. Like started off a little slow because Batista was just basically dominating them for like the first quarter of the match. But then once he had Chris Jericho and Edge started going at each other, and then both of them double teaming Batista, that's when things really picked up. But then it's where Edge and Jericho really went at each other. It made things really interesting. But yeah, Batista basically attacked Edge while he was still doing his entrance, and then, like I said, dominated the early parts of the match. And then much later in the match, when you had Edge and Jericho, just them, Jericho had the walls of Jericho locked in on Edge. Edge looked like he was going to tap, but then Batista broke it up. And like I said, that's when things really picked up from there. All 3 men going at each other, and then, trying to fight one another. And Edge tried to spear Batista, but then Jericho stopped him, but then Batista hit a spine buster for a near fall. And then you had the finish. The finish saw Jericho take Batista off the apron with a springboard drop kick, but then Edge, being the ultimate opportunist, before he was the ultimate opportunist, he took advantage with a spear to Jericho to keep his Intercontinental title. So some pretty good stuff between all 3 men in the second half of that match. And it was really surprising where, going back to that Toronto crowd, despite being in his hometown of Toronto, the fans in the Air Canada Centre were booing Edge, even though he was a face too. They were cheering Jericho. I mean, who was from Winnipeg, but I mean, Jericho was from Edmonton. They were in Edmonton for Backlash, and then they're still cheering Jericho a good amount. So it was an interesting choice. Like, it was an interesting choice for the Toronto crowd to like basically boo Edge during that whole match, and then they ended up cheering him a little bit post match. So I wonder what was going on. I wonder what was going on during that time. Why they were not liking Edge, even though it was a babyface. Maybe he was just too vanilla. I don't know. I'm not sure what the thought. I'm not sure what was going on during that time with Edge's like character direction at the time. Maybe yeah, that's what it was. Maybe it was just too vanilla. There wasn't any direction. I don't know. I'd like to know what you guys thought about that. So either way, Edge did end up winning this match, but unfortunately, he ended up suffering a groin injury at a house show a few weeks later. So Eric Bischoff stripped him of the Intercontinental title, and when he came back, he began the build for his slow heel turn that happened at the end of 2004. So, well, maybe that was the direction that he needed, and it was a big direction that helped him in the long run. Meanwhile, Chris Jericho would win the vacant Intercontinental title at next month's Unforgiven pay-per-view in a ladder match in his resumed feud with Christian that started back at WrestleMania. So that story resumed, and well, Chris Jericho became the Intercontinental title champion. But either way, very solid match. And the show picked up a little bit from there, as it was starting to go a little downhill with the last two matches that I talked about. So next up, we had the one of the big key matches of the night, and that involved Kurt Angle going up against Eddie Guerrero. Kind of a little bit of a blood feud with this match because, well, these two have been beefing since WrestleMania when Eddie Guerrero had retained his WWE title against Kurt Angle at WrestleMania 20, and Kurt Angle, shortly after, was injured by well, it's the Big Show. So Kurt Angle, he was also legitimately dealing with injuries too. So this is kind of a way to write him off from the wrestling ring and keep him on screen to become the new general manager of SmackDown. So he maintained an on-screen presence for a couple months, and 3 months later, the feud between Eddie and Kurt was reignited when Angle had a little bit of an influence in the WWE title match between Eddie and John Bradshaw Layfield at Great American Bash. So Eddie Guerrero seemed to have retained the WWE title at the event in a Texas bull rope match, but Kurt Angle reversed the decision and declared JBL the winner instead and the new WWE champion. So that effectively screwed Latino Heat. 2 weeks later, Kurt Angle also cost Eddie Guerrero the WWE title again. No, wait, he screwed himself? Anyway. So Angle disguised, Kurt Angle screwed Eddie Guerrero again inside of a steel cage by disguising himself as El Gran Luchador. So, yeah, that pissed off Eddie Guerrero, but it also cost Kurt Angle and exposed him to Vince McMahon, because that would cost Angle his general manager position, as Vince said those two famous words to Kurt Angle the following week: "You're fired," for faking his injuries, and scheduled a match between him and Eddie for SummerSlam. So, yeah, I mean, we're going to get the rematch from WrestleMania 20, and honestly, not as good as the one at WrestleMania, but this match was fine. This match was, I'd say it's still a very solid matchup, but yeah, I felt it was a little slow, a little bit slow because of the very mat-based wrestling, except this time it at least told a little bit of a story with Kurt Angle really targeting Eddie's ankle, and even not falling for Eddie's little trick of trying to get the boot, trying to fall for the boot trick. So with this match, Eddie tried using Angle's own ankle lock, which he did, but then Angle ranked him in the eyes to escape it, and then locked in the ankle lock a few times to really damage Eddie's ankle. And then, like I said, during one of those ankle locks, Angle untied Eddie's boot in a callback to their Mania match, and that would be the key going forward. So, like I said, a slow start to the match, but it was served to tell the story of Angle really picking up, targeting on Eddie's exposed ankle, that he keyed in on. So things really picked up from there. Both of them hitting their signature moves on each other, the Angle Slam, the Three Amigos, and then Eddie tried to go for a frog splash and all that. But Angle would lock in the ankle lock on Eddie's exposed ankle. But then Angle got thrown into the referee by Eddie for a rep bump, and that allowed Eddie to hit both Angle and the bodyguard, Luther Reigns, with it. And then, yeah, so you had the finish, which I liked, and it really got the crowd on their feet. Saw Eddie hit the frog splash for a near fall, and then as Eddie was walking to hit another, Angle caught him out of nowhere for another ankle lock, and then Eddie desperately tried to roll out of it, but unfortunately, Angle really struck that in, and he had no choice but to tap out. So, this was a good match, but I enjoyed the Mania match a lot more, but the story in this one, it served this purpose. It was nicely told, and it set the pace for the second half of the match. And like with the second half of this match, I liked the finish. I liked how the finish was set up, and it set up what ended up being a couple months more for this feud that culminated at Survivor Series with an elimination match, which Eddie's team won. So for this match, pretty good stuff. With the story of Kurt Angle really targeting Eddie's ankle, really going after it and not falling for his tricks, being smarter this time. I liked it. I liked this match. I would say it surpassed the Intercontinental Championship match. So next up, we had Triple H going up against Eugene. This was somehow a SummerSlam match, but it gave something for Triple H to do while he was not hunting down the World Heavyweight title, which was very common during this time. So anyway, Eugene, which we have talked about very frequently during our 2004 retro reviews, he was a wrestler that was portraying a person with disabilities. So Eugene revealed back in May that his favorite wrestler was Triple H. Yeah, right in front of The Rock. Like, he had The Rock standing there and telling me, who's your favorite wrestler? Oh, my favorite wrestler is Triple H. It's like, huh? Okay. So he said the reason why his favorite wrestler was Triple H was because due to his adoration of playing games. So Triple H decided to use that against him after Bad Blood when his feud with Shawn Michaels was over. So Eugene decided to be a target for Triple H by being his buddy as part of a ploy to try and get back the World Heavyweight title from Chris Benoit at Vengeance. But unfortunately, Eugene accidentally cost Triple H the match by hitting him with a steel chair. So the next night on Raw, Triple H forgave him by attacking him, brutally attacking him, making him all bloody, sitting him out on a stretcher. But Eugene wouldn't forget. He wouldn't forget that, pal. He would get his lick back, cost Triple H a rematch against Benoit in an Iron Man match. So Triple H is all pissed, and he goes to Eric Bischoff to give him a match against Eugene at SummerSlam. Eric Bischoff happily agrees to it, but it also lit a fuse in Eugene as well because, well, Triple H lit that fuse because he brutalized his mentor, William Regal, for 2 weeks straight before SummerSlam, and Eugene sent him running on the Go Home show. So it was going to be a little bit of a kind of interesting match. And I don't mean in that kind of way, but, you know, this is what Triple H was doing in the little buffer when he wasn't, running roughshod with the World Heavyweight title. So anyway, as has been with this throughout this feud, Triple H would mess with Eugene's condition by employing underhanded tactics, such as using ring announcer Lillian Garcia as a shield and faking a knee injury to get the upper hand over Eugene. But Eugene would get a lot of offense in this match, even hitting like the rock bottom in the first half of this match. But again, it'd be deterred by him being too overconfident or being, I can't say it. I really can't say it. It's, Anyway, the Toronto crowd was once again acting very strange in this match, just like they did with Edge in his Intercontinental title match. they were booing Eugene in this match. I was like, what isn't Eugene? Weren't people like cheering Eugene like for months during those, like, since he debuted? But now in Toronto, they're booing Eugene and they're cheering Triple H. Wow. Like, wow, Smarky crowds really existed 20 years ago, huh? That's a choice. So anyway, the match itself did go on a little bit too long than it needed to be. But what do you expect from this reign of terror Triple H era? You know, Triple H matches going on longer than they needed to. Even against someone like Eugene, like this, I think this match went on like 10 minutes longer than it needed to. But nonetheless, I thought it kind of protected Eugene in a bit because, well, shenanigans at the end. So the closing moments of this match saw Eugene hit a Stone Cold Stunner on Triple H, but he rolled out of the ring. So that brought in Ric Flair to try and distract him, who still managed to hit Triple H with the big Hulk Hogan leg drop. But Triple H said, "That's not going to work for me, brother." So Triple H took advantage of the distracted Eugene. He tried to hit a pedigree, but instead received one himself. And Eugene seemed like he was going to win this match. But then Ric Flair put Triple H's foot on the rope. That got Flair ejected from ringside. But he wasn't leaving. So that brought up William Regal, knocked his ass out with the brass knuckles. But unfortunately, that led to Eugene's downfall because Eugene was a little too excited to see his mentor William Regal back fresh in the face of the person or whatever it is. He is fresh in person for Eugene to see. And that allowed Triple H to hit the pedigree from behind. And, well, that's how Triple H won this match. So, this match was okay. I mean, it was all right. And I thought Eugene had some interesting offensive moves and told a decent story with Triple H during this match. I thought it went on a little bit too long, in my opinion, but nonetheless, okay matchup. So these two would face each other 2 more times and trade victories with one another. Triple H took the deciding victory in a steel cage match that wrote Eugene off TV with an injury angle. So, yeah, that would actually be the kind of the beginning of the end with Eugene's push on TV. He would have like a couple more like notable things, but mainly in the lower mid card. But nonetheless, this is like kind of his like biggest match per se, his biggest moment, and that was with Triple H, his biggest storyline. So the first of 2 final matches were the WWE Champion JBL, John Bradshaw Layfield, taking on The Undertaker. WWE Champion JBL was fresh off winning the title from Eddie Guerrero at the Great American Bash, successfully defended it inside a steel cage weeks later. But a week after the cage match, after JBL had defeated this jobber in a title match, The Undertaker had challenged him to a match at SummerSlam. JBL had accepted it, and for the next few weeks, he was mocking the dead man, even go as far as getting a midget Undertaker to try and get under his skin, but Undertaker wasn't buying it. So a clothesline from hell to The Undertaker, well, it would get under his skin. So this match was not great. Honestly, it was for most of it, it was very boring. And honestly, I can't blame the crowd. I can't blame the crowd during this match. In this one, they were kind of justified in not giving a fuck. In contrast to the other ones with like Edge, the Edge's triple threat, and Triple H versus Eugene. I really couldn't blame them for like being totally disinterested in this one. And it's kind of disservice to The Undertaker and kind of a little bit of disinterest to JBL. Maybe they just didn't really care about JBL during this time because the Toronto crowd really did not give any fucks. Like they were doing like the wave like for a good 5 minutes of this of the early parts of the match, and they were chanting stuff like Spanish table. It like totally unrelated stuff, and I'm just like, man, I really couldn't. Yeah, it's like the pay-per-view. Yeah, so far hasn't been the best, and actually, for the most part, it kind of sucked. But yeah, when it has, I guess from their perspective, so from 2004, I guess when it sucks so bad, yeah, I can see why they're just like done with it. I can see why. So for the match itself, yeah, like I said, pretty boring for most of it. But again, not outright terrible, because the story of it was pretty much JBL targeting Undertaker's injured knee, using dirty tactics to injure it, like the concerto on Undertaker's knee on the steel steps. But the match at least finally picked up in the very late stages of it and actually got the crowd to pay attention when the Undertaker went on his rally, hitting snake eyes in the turnbuckle and used JBL's clothesline from hell against him. And he even hit a chokeslam for 2 separate near falls. But then JBL took advantage of a distraction from Orlando Jordan to hit the dead man with a clothesline from hell for his own near fall. And then we had a rep bump in the match when Undertaker whipped JBL into the referee in the corner, but JBL took advantage of it by hitting Undertaker with the WWE title, but then couldn't get the 1, 2, 3, no ref. So Undertaker managed to hit the last ride for a near fall when the referee was sort of conscious, but then when JBL got up, Undertaker hit JBL with the WWE title, but then the referee was conscious enough to see it and disqualified the Undertaker. Yeah, logic. That's how it works. It's like JBL hit Undertaker with the belt. He doesn't get disqualified, which kind of makes sense because the referee wasn't awake. But then you had the Undertaker do it, but then he gets disqualified. Sure, pal. But anyway, that made the Undertaker pissed off because, well, he kept on attacking JBL and made him bleed, and then he chokeslammed him through the moonroof of his limo. So that stretched out the feud till No Mercy, where JBL won the feud and the rematch against the Undertaker in a last ride match, which is basically an ambulance match, without the ambulance, it's replaced by a hearse, those things used for caskets and all that. So this match itself, pretty bland, pretty boring for the most part, but they at least got people back into it, sort of, very late, but it was kind of too late in my opinion. And the Undertaker got them to pop for the post-match stuff. Still, the Toronto crowd's antics for most of this, yeah, it's pretty much kind of the theme of this pay-per-view. It was pretty bland. It is pretty, like, I guess it kind of sucked. This pay-per-view, outside of, I'd say, the Intercontinental Championship match and some parts of Triple H and Eugene, this pay-per-view kind of sucked, in my opinion. It really has. So, yeah, like I said, Undertaker would get his rematch and lose to JBL in a last ride match. But, yeah, this match was not that great. It really wasn't. Like, the post-match stuff where Undertaker chokeslammed JBL through the moonroof of the limo, probably, like, the only thing that people remember from this match and probably this SummerSlam. Well, one of the two things. Because let's talk about that last thing that people will remember this SummerSlam for. And that's the World Heavyweight Championship match between Chris Benoit and Randy Orton. Much like with all these other matches from this SummerSlam, not a lot of setup in this matchup. Because Randy Orton, who had lost his Intercontinental Championship to Edge at the previous month's pay-per-view Vengeance, he won a 20-man Battle Royale the next night on Raw to face Benoit for the title, the World Heavyweight title at SummerSlam. And, well, there wasn't a lot of setup for this because it's just basically Randy Orton saying that, oh, I'm gonna pin Benoit and fulfill my destiny to become the youngest World Heavyweight Champion in the history of the WWE at the time. So it is pretty evident that WWE was getting ready to strap the rocket on Randy Orton as their next main man of the company. They're pretty much like grooming Randy Orton. They're pretty much getting him ready to be that guy in the WWE. But this match was so boring. This match was so, I mean, it wasn't bad. It was just like a snooze fest. It's kind of like the WWE Championship match, but at least that had a story. But this one was just like, God, you got to put this on fast forward to like really get to the end. But there were a little bit of highlights. There were some highlights in this one, like Orton and Benoit trading sharpshooter attempts on each other like very early in the match, and then Benoit trying for a suicide dive on Orton, but then Orton dodged it. And Benoit went face first hard on top of the barricade. Like that's a nasty dive onto that. And then much later, you had Benoit almost making Randy Orton tap with the sharpshooter, but he managed to force a rope break. And then Randy Orton did a nice, dangerous counter to Benoit's flying headbutt. Like he put his feet in the air to block it and in kind of a way protect Benoit, because Benoit has always been doing that flying headbutt. So by that point, at least, the crowd was paying a little bit more attention into this match, because once again, they were chanting Spanish table, like during the match. So they're doing a lot of chanting of other things unrelated to the match. So the finish saw as Randy Orton was trying to pin him, Benoit locked in the crippler crossface, but Orton managed to roll out of it. And then Benoit tried to set it up again. RKO out of nowhere. And 1, 2, 3, we had a new World Heavyweight Champion and the youngest in WWE history. So Randy Orton fulfills his destiny. And well, I mean, just as when with a lot of the matches on this show, it didn't really pick up until very late with like the close calls and then the finish, which, it was important at the time. Like, it was very important at the time. Like, Vince McMahon, like I said, really wanted to put the rocket onto Randy Orton. And like I said, that night was when he fulfilled his destiny as the youngest World Heavyweight Champion in WWE history and the youngest overall WWE Champion in history. Like, he surpassed Brock Lesnar as the youngest champion, like the youngest world champion in history. So, I think no one has surpassed that yet, but someone fact check me on that. But yeah, at that time, 20 years ago, Randy Orton fulfilled his destiny of doing exactly what he was going to do, become the youngest champion in history. So afterwards, Benoit and Orton shaking hands after the match, so for Orton to prove that he was a man. And well, that's how SummerSlam 2004 came to a close, and the young age of Orton began for 30 days. Why do I say that? Well, after Randy Orton defeated Benoit in a rematch the next night on Raw, the rest of Evolution threw a celebration for him. And it seemed like, it was all going to be sunshine and rainbows in Evolution. It's never a mystery. Well, unfortunately for young Randy, this actually turned out to be his exit. It turned out to be his exit from the group because, well, it obviously was Triple H. It of course, Triple H set it up because he wants that World Heavyweight Championship so badly. Of course. Reign of Terror Triple H has to strike again, huh? So anyway, Orton spent the next month feuding with Evolution, but unfortunately, he lost the title to Triple H at the next pay-per-view, Unforgiven, thanks to Ric Flair, Batista, and for some reason, Jonathan Coachman. But yeah, he lost. His destiny had become a nightmare literally a month later. But when you listen to Randy Orton, like in much later interviews in his life, and in documentaries, there was reason for it. There was reason why he lost the World Heavyweight Championship so quickly, because it's been documented that, well, and by both Orton himself and several of his peers, and I guess in a way to paraphrase it, Orton was not ready for the spotlight, the very large spotlight of holding the World Heavyweight Championship, mainly because, well, he wasn't mature enough. He wasn't responsible enough at the time to do so. He was like, 24 years old at the time, and he was still acting like a kid, according to him and according to his peers. So, in a nutshell, he essentially was not ready to be that top man on Raw, or let alone the face of the company. So, yeah, he was basically lacking maturity. But fortunately for Randy Orton, his later world title reigns in his later career would be much more successful. He also showed a lot of growth and maturity from himself. So it all turned out for much better for him in the end. So, yeah, I mean, this world heavyweight title run was at least a learning, some growing pains for Randy, but also a reality check for him, which a very good one for him to help him learn something in life. So overall, this 2004 edition of SummerSlam, yeah, it sucked. It kind of sucked. Like, the only things to remember from this show are The Undertaker chokeslamming JBL through the limo, and of course, the photo finish of Randy Orton becoming the youngest World Heavyweight Champion in WWE history. I guess if you want to say a match that you should go back and watch, I guess you could say the Intercontinental Championship match between Edge, Batista, and Chris Jericho. I guess that's a match you can go back and watch. Maybe Triple H and Eugene, but that's not really saying much. Because other than that, you can see why the Toronto crowd at the time were getting very antsy. They eventually turned on the show. They even turned on the Divas Dodgeball segment. I didn't even mention that at all because, well, it sucked. That Divas Dodgeball segment was terrible. Man. Like, I don't remember anything that happened on that because it was so bad. Like, when I first watched it, like, just like days before I retro-viewed this show, it was so bad. Like, I think the team Diva Search team kicked the veteran Divas asses. Like, that was, and it was poorly produced too. It's like, I don't know, man. But yeah, most of these matches, they were following the same formula of like headlocks, and very slow pace. But I mean, it's at least it's kind of better than, a bunch of flips, kicks, and no selling. And at least some of them were trying to tell a story at least. But I feel like a lot of these matches weren't enough variety. It was just like a lot more of the same. A lot of the same, like I said, early offense from the babyface, and then the heel thoroughly dominated the match with like headlocks. That really dragged the show down. So I don't know. It was kind of a chore to get through the show, and something I really wouldn't recommend a filthy casual fan to watch because, yeah, nothing really stood out on the show that would say, oh hey, go watch the next pay-per-view, Unforgiven, or watch the next episode of Raw during the time, other than, well, Randy Orton, how he's gonna do his World Heavyweight title run, or go watch SmackDown and all that. If you're watching during this time, yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate how things were during the Ruthless Aggression era. I mean, well, at least it was something compared to right now with 2024, aside from the 3 storylines that are carrying WWE. But I mean, yeah, it doesn't make a complete show though. It doesn't make a complete product. But hell, what can you do? So anyway, let me know your thoughts on the 2004 edition of WWE SummerSlam. We went back and retro reviewed this show. And if you watched it during this time, let me know your thoughts on this pay-per-view. And let me know if you watched this for the first time like I did. I'd like to know your thoughts from a first-time viewer as well, because I certainly had some to talk about. So, yeah, I'd like to have a conversation about this, whether it's in the comments on YouTube or on social media. Send me a message at Cold Lasagna on Twitter or /X and Instagram. So let's have a conversation about it, as long as we're civil about it. And, yeah, I'd like to know your thoughts on the 2004 edition of SummerSlam. But yeah, that is it for this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I am your host, DylanLasagna. Thank you for tuning into this episode number 212 of this icy yet spicy podcast that is Very Cold Lasagna. Until the next one, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of sports. And as always, peace out.